Hello, movers and shakers and the stuck but curious. I'm Freya Gordon, and this is Good Shift, breaking down bold career moves and the habits that make them happen. Hey everyone, today is a very special day because we are recording our first ever podcast episode of Good Shift. So the very first guest is my friend from LA, Kristiana, and I'm so excited to welcome you on today, Kristiana.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me. Honored.
So your story's one that really grabbed my interest. You've taken such a smart and underrated approach to entrepreneurship that I just don't think is talked about enough. And for everyone listening, especially those of you thinking about transitioning into entrepreneurship but unsure where you might want to start, I know there's going to be some amazing takeaways from this episode. All right, Kristiana, let's talk some shift.
Yes.
So, Kristiana, can you start by sharing your career journey to get out of the corporate and startup world and into having your own business?
Yeah, absolutely. So right out of college, I think like many people, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I knew I needed a job. And so I looked into a couple options and ultimately went into general management consulting. So it was a great first job to have. It exposed me to a lot of different kinds of industries, was working on advising large, Fortune 500 companies. So I got a lot of great skills, I guess, right out of school and learned quite a bit from it. But I decided pretty quickly, and I think a lot of people end up leaving general management consulting pretty quickly, that it wasn't for me. I mean, it was very corporate. I wasn't super close to the impact of my work, and I just couldn't imagine doing it for decades. And so I was living in New York at the time. And so I decided that I wanted to do something where I felt the impact of my work and it felt a little more fun. So I was really attracted to the idea of joining a startup, an early stage startup. So I did. I found a job at a company called ZocDoc. For those who aren't familiar,
I love the name.
Yeah, ZocDoc. It's a catchy name. And it's basically a platform where people can book doctor's appointments online. So it's pretty big now. At the time I joined, it was earlier stage. And, it was actually a really fantastic, it kind of checked a lot of my boxes. It was growing, it was fun, the projects were really interesting. I loved the mission. So I wasn't really looking to make a move, but kind of as these things go, right? I got connected through some friends to some entrepreneurs out in Berlin who were doing some really interesting stuff. And so what they were doing was a very early stage startup. They had just gotten some funding that was doing home services. So if you were in Germany and you were looking to get your roof redone or new painting on your house or something like that, this company would offer you a fixed price and ultimately do this job for you. And so they were growing like crazy in the German market, and they were really keen on opening a US office. So they contacted me to be in charge of opening this model in the US. It seems like such an amazing opportunity for where I was at my career at that point. So I said, all right, So packed my bags, moved to Berlin, onboarded there, repacked my bags, moved to Phoenix, where I opened the US office for this company. Got things going, hired a team of 20 people, got the business off the ground. Then 9 months later, fired 20 people and filed the company for bankruptcy when we had run out of funding.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. So, it was very much like the startup experience people don't talk about when it completely fails and crashes and burns. Very stressful at the time, but obviously some amazing learnings in hindsight. So after that, I kind of took a beat and was like, all right, I love being entrepreneurial. I love startups, but maybe for my next move, I'll go somewhere that has kind of found its product market. So back in New York, ultimately joined another home services startup called Handy. And so Handy really specialized in handyman services and maid cleaning services in New York, also growing very quickly. So I worked at Handy first on their partnerships team, working with big retailers like Wayfair and Walmart and Costco, where we were doing kind of the service part for their products. Like Walmart sells TVs, so you might want someone to install those, right? Wayfair sells furniture, so maybe someone to assemble it. So I was doing that for a bit. Handy ultimately got acquired by a very large company called Angie, formerly Angie's List. I got the opportunity to stay on for the acquisition and transitioned into more of a marketing role, so a performance marketing role. And you know how these things go? All of a sudden you blink your eyes, you kind of like wake up and you're like, wow, I've been at this Handy/Angie company for over 7 years, you know?
Wow. So how long had you been in the workforce at this point?
Almost 10 years at this point, right?
Yeah.
So a little over. And so at this point, I kind of took a step back and was like, all right, is this what I want to do? And the answer was ultimately no. I kind of, it was a great job. Loved the company, love everything we were doing. But again, it had very much transitioned, especially after the acquisition, into a very corporate type of job. And I wanted to kind of reset, reboot, be entrepreneurial again. And so I left, decided to take a bit of time off, think, what do I want to do next before kind of just jumping into my next thing. I had the idea in my head that perhaps I would start my own startup and my own company, since that is what I had known. I had a few ideas. So I kind of took the time to be very exploratory. And again, in the back of my mind, I was like, I think I'll probably start my own, probably venture-backed company. But as I was exploring, talking to people, seeing what was out there, I came across this concept that a lot of people called ETA, entrepreneurship through acquisition, which is the concept is buying a small business. So a business that's making money, been around, cash flow positive, buying this business from an owner who in many cases probably wants to retire, because the majority of the small businesses in the US are owned by baby boomers and they don't have a succession plan for their business. So the more I learned about this idea of buying a cash flow positive business, which is in some ways like the complete opposite of a startup, right? That is not cash flow positive and you want to get there. I just love this idea of, instead of starting something from scratch, kind of like that 0 to 1, doing more of a 1 to 10 kind of thing, taking something that exists, that's working well, taking it to the next level. And what I really loved about it, though, was in addition to being aligned with my skill sets, it gave me this idea, this feeling that I could have a bit more control over my life, right? If you own the small business, you're working for yourself ultimately. Mm-hmm. And it's your business, it's your asset. You can kind of decide how you want to spend your time, your resources. And so I think it was this perfect match of, okay, I think I'd be good at this. And I think this would start to put me into a lifestyle that I'm very curious about.
And into the entrepreneurial lifestyle.
Exactly. Into an entrepreneurial lifestyle, but one, because I definitely had an entrepreneurial lifestyle when I was working at these startups, but I certainly wouldn't say I was working for myself. Yeah. Right. So this was a good mix of those things.
Well, you've been on quite a journey and through a lot of transitions, which is really what this podcast is all about, talking through how you've made it through these transitions and ultimately how you've got to where you are today, which is really exciting. So just quickly to give people a bit more context, when did you acquire your recent business? And can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, I'd love to. It's super fresh. So we closed on it in late June. As of now, it's December. So I guess we're coming up on 6 months now, which is crazy. It feels like it's gone by so quickly. But yes, so it is a pool cleaning and repair business that focuses on commercial pools.
You seem to really have a thing for the glamorous home services.
Yes, I do. No, I've definitely carved out a niche now in home services, which again, it's not an accident. I acquired a home services business. I was specifically looking for that given my background. But yes, it's a pool cleaning and repair business. It's based out of West LA. It was founded in 1983.
Wow.
Crazy, right? By the man I bought it from named Robert. He moved here from Quebec in the 80s and was cleaning pools and living out of his van in Venice.
That's a cool story.
It's a very cool story. And he's a really cool guy. And he grew this business, slowly and responsibly over the course of 40 years and made it into a pretty impressive business that it is today. So, yeah.
That's really epic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And how are things going so far for you?
So far, so good. The first couple months, people talk about the J curve, where things get bad before they get good.
Okay, yeah, I haven't heard of the J curve before. So
the J curve, yeah, it's talked about a lot in the small business space, and the concept is right after you buy the small business, things will get worse before they get better.
A bit of a daunting feeling.
Exactly.
After dropping a lot of cash.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Changing your lifestyle for this.
Totally, yes. Lots of cash, lots of time, lots of energy, lots of risk. and then you immediately kind of jump into a bit of chaos, right? You know, he's had the business for 40 years, over 40 years. He has a certain way of doing things. The customers know him, the employees know him. You know, enter me, this random person they've never met. You might lose customers, you might lose employees, you will definitely be learning a lot. And so all of these things happened the first couple months. And I was like, man, was this a huge mistake? But I feel like now I'm kind of over the hump a bit. And it's been what I wanted. It's been what I wanted and expected. And I'm having fun. So yeah.
I'm stoked to hear that. One of the things you just mentioned was about there being a lot of challenges when you first jumped into it. And did you ever have moments where you were thinking, shit, I should just get back to the corporate world, or being under someone else's watch where I'm not holding all this risk and responsible as well for these employees and other people?
Yeah. Maybe just to like set the stage a little bit, it's when you buy a small business, typically the way you do it is you put down a down payment like you would in a home. So, 10, 20, 30%, whatever of the business's value. So you're out a lot of cash, which is stressful. But then on top of that, most people finance the rest. A lot of it comes from a loan that you take out from a bank, which you're personally liable for. An SBA loan is what it's called. And so to kind of set the scene a bit, I've spent all this time buying this business. I'm really excited about it. I'm out a lot of money, and I have this huge loan looming over me for the next 10 years that I'm personally liable for. So, cars, houses, anything you have, if you can't pay the loan,
that's fucking intense.
They'll find you. Yeah.
They will hunt you down.
Yeah, they will get you. And so there's a bit of financial stress. And then on top of that, customers are like, who are you? Where's Robert? And then employees are also like, who are you? Right. And so all of this is kind of culminating. And then on top of that, like I mentioned, I closed the business in July, which is sort of peak summertime. So everyone's thinking about the pool. So,
did you close it down while you did a changeover? You mean you closed the deal?
I closed the deal, exactly.
I was going to say, I can imagine there would be a lot of unhappy people if you closed down your pool cleaning services. It was
business as usual, but it was the peak of the summer. And so the phone's ringing off the hook. And so to answer your question, when I made this transition, were there moments where I was like, whoa, I really miss corporate life? Absolutely. I mean, being on someone else's watch, taking none of that risk that sits, because of course a corporate job can come with a lot of stress, but not the risk.
Yeah. And when you were looking those feelings in the face, how did you overcome them?
I kind of felt like I had two minds. I had my emotional brain, which was like, wow, this is so stressful. Was this a huge mistake? Feeling a bit of doubt. But then I sort of had this like logical brain that was talking to me. It was sort of saying like, this is normal. Everybody knows that the first couple months is a J curve. There's nothing unique about this situation. And anyone you talk to will tell you the same. And the kind of mantra through that time was the only way out is through. There's no shortcuts. There's not a trick to this.
Can't go over it. You can't go under it. You've got to go through it.
Just through it. Yeah. And so I think how I kind of got through that phase was having that little logical side of me, and there's a community of people out there that buy these small businesses, and it's a really good community. And they call themselves searchers because they're searching for a small business. And so I did lean on that community a bit. Other friends of mine who had gone through it, I was like, is it supposed to be this hard? They're like, yes, it is. So I think that helped a lot as well.
So talking about that community of searchers for other people who are looking to get into something like this themselves, is that something that is out there that people can just drop into?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so like I said, when I was sort of in my exploratory phase, looking at what might be out there, I came across this concept and then very quickly found there's actually a lot of people out there doing this. So there are great communities if you're interested in looking into it. An online community that a lot of people use is searchfunder.com or searchers. And then there's also a lot of books and podcasts and things in the space that people read and look into. And so I really kind of immersed myself in all of that while I was looking for this business.
That's epic. Yeah. So I think I've heard that these are called boring businesses.
Boring businesses. Yeah, a lot of people call them that. Yeah.
And so Did you have an inkling that this was something that you might want to get into when you were balancing between thinking about having a startup of your own and this, or when you were taking that time off, was it just something that was completely new to you? And then how did you learn more about it? You've mentioned podcasts and books. Yep. So was it sort of self-taught?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had never heard of it until the time off. So this was a completely new concept to me. And it almost felt like, wow, that's such a good idea. I can't believe nobody's doing it. But now that I'm in the space, I'm like, everybody's doing it, But how I heard of it, I actually went to a speaker panel here in Venice, a co-working space put on. And the idea was it was a partner at a VC fund who was coming to talk. And the topic was how to raise right now in this space, because it's been more challenging recently if you have a startup to raise VC money. So she was kind of talking about alternate funding paths that you could explore if you were in the startup world. And she gave a really interesting talk, and I found her really compelling. And so after her speech and in the panel, I came up to her, introduced myself, asked her a few questions, and she asked me, what are you up to? And I said, I'm actually thinking about starting a startup. I have a few ideas I'm vetting. I kind of rattled them off to her. As you can imagine, a lot of my ideas were kind of home service space-based ideas. And as I was talking her through one of them, she was like, kind of like a boring business. And I didn't know what, because I was talking about an idea I had for...
You're like, no, it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I didn't know what she meant. I said, what do you mean by a boring business? And she's like, a lot of these home services, electrical companies, plumbing companies, so on and so forth. There's this movement, of people buying boring businesses. And so after she kind of said these words, right, I went online after, started looking. And then that's when I kind of stumbled into all of these various podcasts and content. I think probably the most known person in the space talking about boring businesses is Cody Sanchez, who talks about this a lot, like laundry mats and things like that people are buying. So.
Does she have a podcast?
Yeah, she does.
Does she? Okay.
Yeah. And it's very popular. It's a very big one. And again, as soon as you start dipping your toe in this, you realize there's so much content out there. But yeah, I think Cody's sort of the one out there that gets a lot of people hooked on this idea.
Cool. So, well, go find Cody, everyone. So I've heard with the current market conditions, there are more opportunities than ever to acquire established businesses, boring businesses, that you've been talking about. So what advice would you give to someone who is thinking about acquiring a business like this and unsure where they might start once they've started digging into a bit of the information and getting that background?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think one, like anything, if you decide this is what you want to do, to actually make it happen, you need to commit to it fully, and you need to have the mindset of I'm definitely buying a small business. If you treat it kind of like a hobby or it's just something, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't, it's not going to work, because there's so many businesses out there, but there's not a perfect business. There's no such thing as that. And if there was, you couldn't afford it anyway, because it's going to be so expensive. Everyone's going to want to buy it. And so when you're looking at businesses to buy, it's really easy to find reasons not to buy them, right? This thing's a little wrong. This isn't exactly what I wanted, right? Because the perfect business doesn't exist. So if you go into it with the wrong mindset, which is, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, it won't work, because you're always going to find a reason not to. So I think that's the number one thing when you go in, be like, I'm going to get a business. They say to a lot 1 to 2 years to find it. So say, I'm going to get it, and I'm going to get it in under 2 years, and you have to tackle it with that.
Yeah. So getting your mindset sorted.
Exactly.
First priority.
Yeah, exactly. So, research it and think of if this is something you want to do. But once you've decided you want to do it, you have to kind of go full in. So that would be the number one.
That makes sense. And I've heard you talking about a criteria that you had for sort of picking the business. So let me know if there's a step in front of this. But I would love to hear about sort of what your criteria was and how you came up with this criteria.
And that is the next most important part, is you have to have, again, there's so many businesses out there and so many different kinds that if you don't have a clear point of view on the kind of business you want and what you're looking for, it's never going to work. You're going to be overwhelmed. So once you've committed, you do need to have the criteria. And so for me, I had a good criteria, which is, one, you have to kind of decide the size of the business you want to buy, which is going to dictate the price of it. And then you have to make decisions. All right, how much of my own money am I going to put in? There are investors that invest in these types of businesses as well. If you want to get something bigger and get, an investor on board, that's an option. But that's kind of thing number one. What's the range of sizes that I want for this business? That needs to get sorted. And then number 2 or 3 or 4 is then you need to have criteria that are more specific to you. So for me, as an example, I was like, I want a services business, since that's what I know. Specifically, I want a home services business. So I don't want a restaurant, or a laundromat necessarily.
Yeah. So some other examples of like boring businesses outside of home services. Can you just run
Sure.
a few
I think
through?
a few of the most classic ones you'll hear about a lot because they're perceived as easy to run is car washes and laundromats.
Yeah.
So you'll hear a lot about those. But I mean, I think, and I might get this wrong, I think there's kind of 3 broad categories, which is service businesses, a manufacturing business, and maybe the third one I forget is a distribution type business. So, I mean, to give you a sense of the types, I saw a business that what they did was they made traffic lights for cities, right? Very niche, but someone's got to do it. I saw another business that, I guess this is a home services ones where they do paving for parking lots. I mean, it can really be anything. If you look at all the random equipment around you, someone manufactures microphones and little parts and cameras. And a lot of times these can be very small
All
businesses.
the sexy little things that we never think of.
You never think of it. And then as soon as you start looking into it, you're like, yeah, I guess somebody has to make, these cups or these pieces or what have you. But so it can really run the gamut. So,
okay, that's super helpful context. Thank you. So in terms of your personal criteria as well, can you talk us through that a little bit?
Yeah. So I picked the size of the business I wanted. I knew I wanted home services.
And what is the size of your business on a sort of scale?
Yeah, on a scale. So if you're not familiar with the space, most people talk about small businesses in terms of how much profit that they run, which will then dictate the size. So for me, I wanted something that was between $250,000 and $750,000 in SDE, which is a metric that's like profitability. So that is definitely on the small side of a small business. It can get smaller, but it can also certainly get larger as well. So that was the kind of profit I wanted it to be, between $250,000, $750,000.
And would that just depend on like what people saw for their vision for the future, how much cash they had in hand at the time, how much experience they had, and all that sort of stuff as to where they find themselves on the scale?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that'll dictate the size of the business is how much cash you're willing to put in, for sure. And then if you want to seek investment money as well. And the more experience you have under your belt, the easier it's going to be for you to secure a loan. I mean, someone right out of college, 22, with no experience, I don't even know if they'd be able to secure.
You're not a viable candidate for a loan.
Yeah. So I think
makes sense.
You have to have, which I'm sure there are ways, but I think the more experience and background you have, the easier the financing part's going to be, for sure.
Great. Sorry, I keep derailing you
It's
from your criteria.
No,
carry on.
I spent a lot of time thinking about it. So size, for me, home services. And then from there, I wanted a really old business, preferably 10 years old, but if not more than that. So I wanted something that had been around a very long time. My logic being that the longer it's been around, the less likely it is to just disappear overnight. I mean, if you think about the business I bought, 40 years old, it's weathered multiple recessions, COVID, all the things it's seen. And so I wanted old business, and I wanted a conservative growth business. Some people look for high growth small businesses. I wanted one that was growing more like 3 to 5% year over year, like very steady, predictable growth, nothing crazy. And then my kind of last criteria was I wanted one where the value adds and what I could bring to the business were very obvious to me, and that I felt really confident I could execute on them. And so for this small business in particular, it was very much, when I bought it, run totally pen and paper, right? They're using QuickBooks, but outside of that, no technology whatsoever. And so I felt like I could really add value there. They didn't have an established hiring funnel. It was very, referrals and someone's buddy kind of thing. So I was like, all right, I can add a hiring funnel. And they had no marketing or sales funnel, very word of mouth, referral again. And I have a background in marketing. And so I felt confident that I could add value there. So, I mean, as I was looking at the business, it was very strong foundation and had so much going for it. And I felt like, all right, I know what I could do to kind of bring it to the next level. So, yeah.
So what are some core skills that you got from your corporate and startup life that you think have set you up really well for running your own business?
Yeah, for sure. And I really don't think I could be doing what I am now without some of the more like corporate background that I had. But I think one is I had a lot of experience running P&Ls, profit and loss statements, really understanding when I look at a business, what the numbers mean, what they are, where they can be improved, what the levers are. So I think that was invaluable. And then even just the process of buying the business itself before you're even running it. I mean, you're negotiating with the seller, you're interfacing with banks. Like you have to be comfortable running negotiations, dealing with different stakeholders, right, who have like different motivations. And I think a lot of that, and come off as a credible candidate to the bank, And so I think a lot of that was definitely gained in the corporate world. And I mean, the soft skills now as I'm running the business, again, it's a commercial pool cleaning business. And so I'm dealing with a lot of homeowners associations and board members and things like that. And I think I know how to talk with them about their problems and about pricing and all of this because of some of the experience I have doing that in corporate America. So
yeah, you've set yourself up really well. And I think that's another good thing for people to think. Some people think they might be wasting their time away in a corporate job or doing something else, but really, I believe everything you're doing every day is actually setting you up with good skills to do whatever you want to do next.
I completely agree. Yeah. And I think sometimes people like to hate on the corporate life, but again, someone said this to me once. I made so many mistakes in corporate life on somebody else's dime, right? There were things I did at the startup where I lost the company a lot of money or like...
we've all been there.
Yeah. And what a great thing to be able to make those big mistakes early in your career on somebody else's dime and
have somebody else to guide you through those and help you realize them.
Yeah, exactly.
So something that I've really noticed about you through our friendship, but that I can see has obviously translated through into your working life is the confidence that you have. So I'm really interested to know how you've built that confidence to start with, or were you just born with it? And then how have you maintained that, especially going through tough times where maybe you lost a lot of money at a corporate business or going through your own business journey?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I do think you need some level of confidence or self-assuredness to do anything entrepreneurial because you're making a big bet in yourself and your ability. So you definitely have to go into it feeling confident in yourself or else it's going to be a mental struggle the whole way. And I mean, of course, I have doubt in like anybody, but I do feel for the most part confident in my ability and what I'm doing. And I think in terms of how you build that, I've definitely had, as I talked about, some massive like failures early in my career.
Can you actually, you carry on and then I'm keen to hear about one of your biggest failures that gave you a good learning.
I think the biggest one for sure was that startup I mentioned, the German one, where the company ultimately, the US branch ultimately had to fold and file for bankruptcy. I mean, that's a capital F failure. I started a company and then wasn't able to run it in a successful way. And then ultimately the company folded, right? And there were a lot of factors. I mean, certainly you couldn't 100% say that was all Kristiana, was the business model sound? Was it the right time? All of that. But certainly you could attribute a lot of that to me and how I led it and, or didn't lead it, right? And then I had a couple other failures, within jobs and projects where a project didn't go as well or crashed and burned or things like that, like anyone might have in a job. And so I do think you need some of those failures and then to build your confidence to see that you come out the other side and it's fine, right? Here.
Yeah, and with a failure that felt so probably monumental to you, like with the German company.
Yes.
How do you pick yourself back up and keep going after that?
God, that's a good question. I was in a really low space after that because I felt the weight of the failure and it's very prominent. I was going to bankruptcy court and
absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, going line by line, how it failed. And so I think with that, you really need a community for sure. I mean, you'll be dealing with it alone. So I think friends, partner, community, you absolutely need that to get you through the other side. But then you need to kind of acknowledge, I think, to yourself, like, that you're feeling this way, and remember it's all temporary, right? That it's not going to be this way forever. But yeah, I think through that time, had I not had a good friend and communities, and if you can, which I know is not always an option for people, if you can take a bit of time off after like this, when the company went bankrupt, I took some forced time off, right? I didn't have something to go to, but I think having just a bit of space can be really, really helpful. So yeah.
Well, you've obviously done an awesome job to get back up and keep going. That's something that I'd like to hear a little bit more about when you have taken space, which you've done at least twice by the sounds of it after that. And then also when you were figuring out next steps before you bought this business, how has that been really crucial to you developing yourself and setting you up for next steps?
I think I was telling somebody like, oh, I'm leaving my corporate job at Angie. I'm going to take a bit of time off. And they referred me to an Oprah podcast.
I thought you were going to say a counselor.
No, they referred me to an Oprah where she was saying, I'm not going to say the quote exactly, but it really hit, it really resonated at the time. When you're not sure what to do, just be still, right? Because I think the inclination is
powerful.
Yeah, it's a really good one. The inclination, especially if you're kind of a hustler and a doer, is you just kind of want to go on to the next thing right away. Whereas I think if you are still for a moment, you might be receptive to things you wouldn't have thought about otherwise. And I'm a perfect example of that. I didn't even know of this idea of buying a small business. So if I just jumped to the next thing, you'd probably be talking to someone who had started some sort of venture-backed company, which I'm much happier that I'm doing this. I think that I'm much better suited. So I think taking the time to be still and not pressuring yourself to immediately hop into the next thing and maybe do things you wouldn't have otherwise done to get your brain working other ways. During my little time off before buying this business, I took a creative writing class. Like I started hanging art. I made a little gallery wall in our living room. Yeah, just things like that are small little rituals, but with the intent of letting your brain and your neurons, kind of fire in ways that they wouldn't otherwise, so that you're more open and receptive.
And then I guess you're also taking that time to attend things like the seminar where you learned about the boring business.
Yeah, exactly. And trying to do a little exploration and being active about it.
Yeah, so just sort of letting things sit and going out and getting them, but also letting things come to you.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a mix.
So you were just talking about taking the time off from Angie, and you were obviously doing really well in that world, making a lot of money, I presume, and then you're taking risk to go into something that, well, as you know very well, could potentially lose you a lot of money or be extremely stressful. So how did you deal with that transition? I think it's something that really paralyzes people, thinking, hey, I could keep going, like I'm climbing up the corporate ladder, I'm going to have a great salary, I might be tied to a job I don't like, but hey, it doesn't matter because at least I've got security and I know everything's going to be okay. So can you talk us a little bit through the mindset there and your journey as to how you got yourself onto the edge of the diving board?
I'm glad you asked that, because I do think, like many people, I have a big scarcity mindset, right? And I spent a lot of time and effort and work building my career to a point where I was making a lot of money and had a really good job security. And I enjoyed what I was doing. I wasn't miserable at this job. And it was, it had challenges, but it was comfortable and felt quite secure. And so this idea of, okay, I'm going to not only spend a bunch of this hard-earned money to buy a small business and take on all of this financial risk, but at a small business, you're not able right off the bat to pay yourself these large corporate salaries. That's not possible. And so there was that was one of the big blocks, because if you looked at all of the other things, check, entrepreneurship, check, ownership, but the financial piece was quite daunting on many levels. But actually, a friend of mine recommended this book. It was before I even started this journey, but I think it had some useful tools, called Die with Zero, right? Which is about this idea of what's the point of spending your whole life trying to hoard up all of this money and resources. You want to die with zero, right? Which, you can make arguments. Maybe people don't. But I think it laid out this really good concept for me of throughout the course of your life, there are times to spend and there are times to save. And one of the reasons you save during times of abundance, so you save in times of abundance so that you can give that to yourself in lower times. So I think that kind of mindset, it's not as if your entire life you should just be saving nonstop. The saving has a purpose. And so that was sort of a helpful reframe for me. It's like, all right, I had these times of financial abundance, which now is the time where I cash that in. And then worst case scenario, this doesn't work out. Who's to say I couldn't go back to a corporate job, years from now? That's what I want to do. So I think kind of that idea of remembering that you're saving with a purpose, not just for the purpose of hoarding, was helpful.
I like that mindset as well about realizing that you can go back and do this other corporate job. I feel like some people think if I make a change, that's it. No one will ever take me back. Like if I quit my law job, for example, no one will ever want me back in the law. 3 years off will mean I lose all this time. But really, that's just a limiting belief.
I completely agree. Yeah. And it might be a bit more challenging, right? If you've taken time away from something. But I don't think you're checking yourself out of that forever, So yeah, I agree.
I think on the topic of limiting beliefs, there's a lot to explore there, and you would have had to overcome a lot, and we've talked about some of those, but I think limiting beliefs is a really key factor to people stopping doing what they might want to do, and those could range from things like people thinking they're not smart enough to do something, or they have absolutely no business experience, so they wouldn't be able to be an entrepreneur. So can you talk us through a few limiting beliefs that you had and then how you reframed those? Because I think part of the thing about limiting beliefs, yes, we can identify them, but then how do we reframe them into something that can be positive to move us forward?
Yeah, I mean, definitely with this business, a self-limiting belief I had was I have absolutely no experience with pools specifically, right? And running a small business. Will people, the limiting belief is the customers, people won't accept me as a credible owner for this business. And ultimately it'll fail, right? I'm not going to be able to grow it and do all the things. But I think a couple things that helped me through that one is some of it just being objective and factual. If you look around LA, I mean, there's probably definitely hundreds, if not thousands of successful pool cleaning companies, meaning there's people making a profit and making money. So I was like, there's almost this thing of you kind of have to ask yourself, is there something special about me? Am I bad in sort of a special and unique way? Like, no,
that's a really good way to think about it.
And I do think especially it's kind of a millennial thing, right? We think we're these special little snowflakes, but I think it cuts both ways. When we're thinking about our failures and our self-limiting beliefs, we kind of have this like, I'm uniquely special in a negative way. But that's not true. If there's hundreds of other people, maybe thousands in LA who can run a successful pool business, probably hundreds of thousands in the US, why am I so special that I can't, right? So I think that
I love that.
That was one that was sort of helpful. And I think another kind of self-limiting belief, less around pools specifically, but more around this idea of, I've run businesses, I have experience, but not in this context of running a small business. Will it just completely crash and burn, under my leadership? And I don't necessarily know if I overcame that self-limiting belief before taking the leap. It was just sort of like a calculated risk where I was like, you know what? And sometimes these small businesses do crash and burn, it does happen. So I just kind of trusted and sort of took the leap, and time will tell if I'm able to run it, for years to come.
Well, so far, so good.
So far, so good. Yeah.
So talking about taking the leap, what was the push factor? Was that to jump into this business? So you obviously took the time off, and then how did you know, hey, this is the right one? Because I know you said that you can actually take 1 to 2 years as sort of the average finding time, but I know that you found yours a lot more quickly.
I did.
So how did you not think to yourself, well, gosh, I'm not at the 2-year mark, this can't be right, and then take that leap?
Yeah, I did get a bit lucky finding mine as quickly as I did, but I almost think about So I knew this was the right path for me because I felt excited by it, right? When I thought about this idea of buying a small business, I could feel the excitement. So I knew this path was correct. But in terms of why this business specifically, I felt very excited about it for sure when I was looking at the financials and sort of all the initial metrics on it and its story and how it came to be. I felt excited by it. So I knew it was a good path. But then in terms of how I kept knowing it was the right path as I go down this journey, because it can take 3 to 6 months between you finding the business to actually you own the business. So you do along the way kind of have to keep being like,
there's plenty of room for doubts in there.
Correct. Exactly. And, I don't necessarily know the answer to that. It almost kind of feels like, what is it, like the frog boiling in the pot where the water keeps getting like hotter and hotter and all of a sudden it's boiling, but the frog isn't sensitive to those temperature changes because it's a process, right? So you're like, oh, this is an interesting business. Oh, like we've done our due diligence. It checks out. Oh, the bank has agreed to back it, and so you kind of, it's like that.
You keep getting like scurried along by small little wins.
Exactly. The small wins keep building. Then all of a sudden you're like, I think I'm going to buy this business. Had I maybe had a, oh shit moment along the way, like, oh, after I did my deep due diligence, it didn't match up with what I thought, maybe that would have pulled me out. Or if the seller and I had a little argument or disagreement, maybe, so had there been a really negative thing that happened along the way, maybe that would have ripped me from the process of buying it and maybe would have created some too much doubt there to go forward. But I think the like small little wins, and there's such a process you go along that all of a sudden you're like, wait, buying this business. So yeah.
And here we are.
And here we are. Yeah.
And in terms of taking the leap from your corporate job to the startups and making all those changes through your career before you ended up buying the business, how did you go with those? And at this point, I'm assuming you also haven't had so much experience with giving yourself confidence for momentum. So I'd particularly like to jump into the first time you made a shift and how that felt.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's so funny. I think every time I've given notice for a job and left, it's absolutely terrifying.
It's so scary. Yeah. You feel like you're really personally letting someone down.
100%. Yeah. It's a very weird feeling. People leave jobs all the time. It's an incredibly normal thing to do. And I think most people have that. But yeah, I think each time that I've given notice, I don't know if it ever got like easier or less terrifying for each one, but the reaction is always the same. Like, yeah, okay, sure,
you do you.
Yeah. Like, is there anything we can do to keep okay, great. Then I guess you're leaving, right? And so I think in terms of gaining up, when I took the first leap, which was leaving consulting and going to ZocDoc, I think one thing that helped, and I think how many people do it, is I had the offer at ZocDoc before, I was leaving.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a forcing function because you or else you're going to disappoint the person who just gave you the offer. So I think in terms of gaining up the confidence to leave, I don't know that I feel nervous every single time. So I think it's more about having so much confidence and excitement for wherever you're going that it just outweighs that fear of leaving as well. And I do think one thing I've done fairly well with some of my exits is I didn't stay so long that I was miserable. Like it's not as if I was just so over the job. Like I still had love for it and excitement, but I just kind of knew it was time to go. So I didn't drag it out. Because I've seen that before where someone stayed there maybe 2 years longer than they should have. And they're like, oh, get me out of here.
And I think that happens to so many people. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are actually in that position where they've let it go too long and they fucking hate their job or they feel really stuck in it because they haven't had the confidence or even just known what to do next. So for people who maybe aren't quite at that stage yet and are worried they're about to go down the path where they end up stuck for 2 years where they're really hating it, what advice would you give?
I would say, and again, I know this isn't an option for everyone given, everyone's circumstance, but if you kind of think you're at the point where you're about to be miserable for a long period of time and it's not just a bad day at work and you've been thinking for a while, it's time to go. I would say just take the leap now and take a bit of time off would be my advice. If that's not an option and you can't leave to take the time off, then I would still encourage people to start doing things they wouldn't normally do and exploring things they wouldn't normally explore, rather than, because I think people, the normal way you do it is you think, okay, I want to leave. Okay, let me see what's out there. And so you start looking for your next job that looks similar with slight tweaks to the job you have, but maybe don't do that right away. Maybe go to some panels, maybe start networking before you just say like, all right, this is the next job I'm going to get, unless you're sure, which, fine. But
yeah, because I mean, people can then go and change jobs thinking that the change of maybe workplace environment or people
manager,
exactly, will make the change, and that may be it. So that's definitely a good reason to change if you love the work, but also you can just end up in the exact same position again.
Correct.
And by this point, you're spending a lot more time doing something and putting all that energy into finding a new job. It's stressful.
Yeah.
That becomes a full-time job. And like interviewing is stressful. So you're putting all this blood, sweat, and tears into something that you could actually put into, I love what you said about going out and networking and doing something different. Even if it's starting going to a pottery class, which is like a habit that you want to get into.
Absolutely.
I think it really opens your mind, and there's a whole lot more people you can meet, and these things are really just become quite fortuitous when you get in the right mindset as well.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, or what you just said, it's if you know exactly what it is about your job that's making you miserable, like you love everything, but you have a really crappy manager. In that case, you might not even need to change jobs. And I mean, maybe you can stay within the same company and have a different manager. Maybe you can just wait a little bit for that. That's happened to me where I hate my manager. You kind of wait and they get fired.
Everyone else hated them
everyone
too.
hates them. They leave. So I think if you can really point to exactly what it is you don't like about your job, you might not even necessarily need to like switch jobs. You can maybe take some tweaks. But if there's more macro things you don't like about your job, then don't go out and just find the exact same one with like a different cast of characters, So, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And another thing that I think is so great for outside of going out, meeting new people, doing new things, is reading books and listening to podcasts. It just expands your knowledge in such a huge way.
Totally agree. Yeah. Travel's such a good one to do as well.
Taking that time off. And I guess really when you do take that time off, making sure you're using it intentionally, not just to go and lie by the pool.
Yeah, exactly. But if it's one of our pools, then,
exactly. And do tell us the name of your business so that anyone in the LA area who needs
a pool cleaner,
repaired or cleaned.
Yes, always looking for a new business. So it is called RD Pool Spas and Fountains, rdpools.com, which is the previous owner's initials. So, yeah.
Okay, love that.
Yeah.
That sounded like it was a closing wrap, but I do have a few more things to ask you. I just wanted to make sure we slid that in there for all the pool people out there. But I've heard you talk about some sort of intention setting at the beginning of each year or something along those lines. So I would love to hear a bit about that, because I think setting yourself up for, it doesn't obviously have to be just at the start of the year, but these sort of practices are so powerful.
I agree. It's actually our mutual friend Meredith who introduced me to this concept of, instead of doing a bunch of New Year's resolutions, which are great, not knocking on New Year's resolutions, but instead of being like, all right, this year I'm going to drink a gallon of water every day, I'm not going to bite my nails, and you kind of have all these little items you're going to do. I'm not going to eat any sugar. Instead, maybe what you can do is have kind of a mantra for the year, which in some ways is more powerful, because then that might guide many changes in behavior as opposed to like the 3 to 5 little resolutions you have. And I love that idea of like, all right, this is kind of the energy and intention I'm coming into for this year. And so when I was coming into this year of, 2024, knowing I wanted to buy a business and knowing that I was trying to set up a certain way of life for myself, the mantra that I had was, this year, I want to eat what I kill. Like, I want to be in control of my destiny, and I'm kind of taking ownership and control of it.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a very primal one, I guess. Yeah. And so that was sort of my mantra for this year, which was very much trying to dictate the mindset I was going into everything with, which I think was helpful, especially when I was going through those really hard couple transition months of taking over the business. I was like, well, this is what you're doing. You're eating what you kill here. Like it starts and ends with you.
So this is something that you can set at the start of the year, but constantly keep bringing back.
Exactly. And I think, the little practices as well, particularly in stressful times, I always come back to journaling. I'm not a daily journaler, especially when things are smooth.
It's so hard to keep that habit consistent.
It really is.
But yeah, I think it's an amazing one.
Yeah, but when I'm stressed out, it's a great one to do beginning and end of day. And so I think these little intentional practice. I'm not a meditator. I would like to be maybe one day.
Well, you do live in Venice, so
I do live
you
in
really
Venice.
should be.
Yeah, I should.
It's really great for everyone to have the examples that you have. I love those. Eating what you kill. So one last thing I want to chat to you about is support. So you've talked about having different communities. There's been the community where you have found the business and things, but what about mentorship or friendship that has really helped you, been by your side, I guess, or taken you through these stages of life?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost one that I would highlight is I've negotiated a lot of deals in my career, with Fortune 500 retailers and Fortune 50 retailers and so on and so forth. But I think the best deal I ever struck was my husband. That's the best. That's the best one.
Shout out to Fed.
Shout out to my husband, because I mean, having a supportive partner, I think is paramount. If you have a partner, making sure it's one that's really supporting you in your journey, in your entrepreneurship journey. And so I think he has been absolutely foundational in getting me comfortable with taking the leap. And it was a joint thing we agreed on together. And so I think that was huge for me, and having a supportive partner. I don't really think if you have a partner, you can do these types of things without your partner's like full buy-in and that network. So I think that was great. But then also I think having friends that I feel very comfortable coming to when I'm low, right? And just being very raw and vulnerable. There were definitely moments with this business in the first couple of months when some of my friends would be, oh, how are you? And I'd be like, I am so bad right now. I am horrible, and being able to just be real and have those raw conversations. And I definitely have some more professional mentors, I would say, people I've worked with or for over the years that I've come to lean on. And sometimes you kind of need those people to hold the mirror back to you, right? When you're like, gosh, I just don't know what I'm doing. I feel like such a failure. This is so hard. And them to be like, yeah, I mean, remember that time when you did this and that at work and it was so crazy and stressful, but you did such an amazing job, and having those kind of like hype people that can pull on real experiences with you where they're like, you will get out of this. So, and one thing I've been trying to be very active about with the small business, because it is more of a lonely work in the sense that,
for sure,
you're entrepreneur, you're alone, you're doing the small business. You don't have like a team of 50 people, you're working with. I have been trying very actively to maintain the professional network that I have and people that I really respect in it, and trying to keep in touch with them and check in on how things are going with them so that I don't lose this as I'm doing my own entrepreneurial journey.
And I think that's something really important for people to remember as well, is that people are so happy to help.
Oh, yeah.
Well, most people. And if they're not, we don't want to talk to them
yes,
anyway.
Exactly.
But, especially friends or mentors that you've made in your workplace, they always love seeing you succeed, and they want to help you do that. So they're a really good resource to lean on and to go back to. And I love what you said about the friends as well. I think a lot of people struggle to be really raw in front of their friends, especially if they feel like they need to uphold some sort of image.
Yes.
Like maybe, in an example like yours, someone might think, okay, I've gone out and done this. Like, it's sexy and cool that I'm doing this entrepreneurial venture. I don't want to go to my friends and like, look, we can be crying and be a failure. So I think it's important to remember that you're friends for a reason, and being able to be raw with them or your partner or whoever you can trust is really essential to getting through the journey. It's not always going to be highs.
Yes, exactly. And I do think people struggle with that in any field, but particularly in the small business space, because you hear about all these wild successes sometimes of, so-and-so bought this small business and then it tripled in year one. And you're like, wow, that's amazing. So I think it's important to talk about the failures too and be comfortable with that, because they're happening, right? So
they're always happening.
Yes.
No matter what you're in, unfortunately.
Yes.
Okay, that's amazing. Now, I wanted to ask you about a book or podcast you recommend. You've already recommended Cody, and you
Cody
recommended
Sanchez,
the book Zero.
Oh, Die with Zero.
Die with Zero.
Yep.
But like, if you were to choose one book or podcast for someone who is at the very beginning of this journey, it might be about mindset shifts, or it doesn't have to be necessarily about boring businesses, but just something that you have found really impactful on your journey, where would you direct people?
If they're looking for a small business specifically, a book, and that's the journey they want to go on, I would say Buy Then Build is a book that lays out very well how to buy a small business and approach it and think about it. So for that specifically, I would say that. And then for more of a mindset book, I would recommend the book Mindset.
Right. Both of these titles are pretty obvious. It's good. Easy to remember.
Yeah. But Mindset's a really good one about kind of this grit mindset and this growth mindset that you want to foster. And I think it's an old book. I think it's kind of one of the OGs that talks about fostering a certain mindset, but it's a good one.
Cool. Well, I'm going to add that one to my list because I haven't read it yet. Okay, Kristi, this conversation has been absolutely epic. I have learned a lot about boring businesses, which actually are not boring at all.
They're not, no.
It's super freaking interesting. And so I know that everyone is going to be really excited to hear all about this, but it's also been great to talk through your personal journey and your mindset, because you have such an incredible attitude towards things, which has obviously got you this far and through a lot of big challenges. Yes. So I'm really excited to see where you continue to go with your business. After this podcast, I'm sure you're going to have tons more clients.
I hope so, yeah.
Keep coming to get their polls sorted. But personally, where can any of the listeners find you if they want to learn more about you or connect with you?
Yeah, so unpopular thing, but I'm not a big social media person.
Love that.
Yeah, so LinkedIn's a good one for sure, Kristiana Laugen. And then people can email me as well. So we can, I guess, give the email in the notes or something like that. But yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing your secret sauce with us. And that's a wrap.
Thanks for having me.